Thank you very much, Renee. Good morning to all of you.
Morning.
The other day, I touched on the subject of facets of transformation, individual and social transformation. Today, I'd like to touch on something more along the work of the Theosophical Society, what perhaps we can do on a larger scale. Last year, if I remember right, I spoke a little about this in Crotona, and I forgot whether I did speak about it here, but the fast changes in technology and events, I think, stresses the need for us to really probe into new avenues of making our work effective. Now, let me just use the analogy of building a house, wherein which every house has a floor slab. The floor slab serves as a foundation of the house. But that floor slab will not be useful at all until we build a house on top of it. And if you have the slab and the house, then it will become useful for living. This idea can be compared to what we are trying to do in our theosophical work, wherein which we are also providing certain layers of things that are useful for the public in general. One of them would be, and the basic one is theosophical information. However, theosophical information is basically like a slab, and we'll have to build something on top of it. If we just continue with theosophical information and no house built on it, then it may not be very useful in the long run. So there's a lot of things available today, either in book form or in the web, which present tremendous amount of information. And I think we'll have to make use of this in order to create an impact in society. Now, I'd like to use the model of a pyramid in speaking about the subject today, in building on a useful hierarchy or structure for society. There are three domains. The first one is, as I said, theosophical information, where we are in the domain of ideas. And then the second one would be on the domain of practice. These two areas are absolutely necessary. One without the other would make the whole thing inadequate. Knowledge alone would be sterile, and practice alone without deep roots would probably be going in wrong directions. And it is on the basis of well-founded ideas and wholesome practice that we can realize personal and social transformation. So let me speak about these two domains. On the domain of ideas, we are really speaking about mainstreaming of theosophical ideas, influencing world thought and culture, and popularizing key concepts. And this is what we've been doing for the past 100 years or more. Now, in the domain of ideas, because of the complexity of society, the number of people in the world, 7 billion of them, we will be unable to reach them by ourselves, and hence we need to depend upon, first, powerful seed ideas, and second, a sufficient degree of dissemination through what is called a multiplier effect in economics. And how do we do so? Let me just start by reminding ourselves of a statement by the Mahachohan. I think all of us are familiar that one of the most important letters ever received by Theosophists from the Mahatmas was this letter by the Mahachohan It is sometimes called the Charter of the Theosophical Society. And it says, "The doctrine we promulgate, being the only true one, must, supported by such evidence as we are preparing to give, become ultimately triumphant as every other truth." Then he says further, "For our doctrines to practically react on the so-called moral code or the ideas of truthfulness, purity, self-denial, charity, etc., we have to preach and popularize a knowledge of theosophy." So this is our mandate, and how to do so is our challenge. In the past many years, the usual avenue for doing this would be things like newspapers, magazines, books, radio, television. But today, things have changed very quickly, such that what used to be the main avenue for dissemination is now fast disappearing. Now, the internet is the #1 avenue for dissemination, and digital books are fast growing. As of last year, I remember that Amazon announced that they are selling, half of their books that they're selling is digital books, and only half would be printed books. Then television remains a major source of information for a lot of people all over the world. Now, last year, I do not know whether I showed this to a gathering here, but I did in Crotona. These are the largest magazines in the world, and you'll be surprised that the biggest magazine in the world is a very little-known magazine. It's called Watchtower, published by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Imagine they're publishing 45 million copies a month in I don't know how many languages. 45 million. This in 2012. And they have a sister publication called Awake, which publishes 43.5 million copies a month. And the next one is this this AARR. I think these are for retired. AARP for retired people. Yeah, a retired person. Okay, 23 million. All right. Now, I was trying to ask. Well, these printed forms are fast disappearing, as what is happening in many areas. Like, for example, Britannica has already announced it will stop printing encyclopedias. Everything will just be in the form of digital encyclopedias. Newsweek has stopped printing. Then Christian Science Monitor has stopped printing. And now the biggest encyclopedia in the world is Wikipedia. Nothing can match it at all. Then Facebook, YouTube, and you know about this. Amazing. 3 minutes of this Gangnam Style video was watched by 1.7 billion people. Imagine if a 10-minute talk by Tim gets watched by 1.5 billion people. He'd be the next president of the United States. It has, so to speak, leveled the playing field. What was not possible before in printed form has now become possible through the internet. It costs virtually nothing to upload something in YouTube. In fact, it's not virtually nothing. It's nothing. It's free, completely free. And so what would take huge amount of physical, financial, corporate machinery in order to achieve something global could now be done even at home by one person. So it opens up tremendous possibilities for us in doing this first part of work, which is the dissemination in the domain of ideas. One of the thoughts that constantly come back to me is that we need to create as many websites on all theosophically related subjects with theosophical references and linkages with one another. They can be autonomous, created by many theosophists, but mutually linked, can be interactive if webmaster has time and competency to reply to questions, and get support from a group of theosophists who will help in the content, in answering questions, in research, and so on. These 2 days I've been talking with Lloyd, and I've learned so much in these 2 days about the complex jungle of in the internet universe. And I learned from him, for example, that a website can be created with very rich content. And in order to make it, bring it on top of a search engine like Google, it must constantly change in its front page. And since we are so busy, we may not be able to do that, like attending to a website every day. But Lloyd said, one doesn't have to do that. There are certain technologies today in which one of them is what is called RSS, real, simple syndication, okay, in which a network of websites can link to each other such that a change in one will automatically change the other in the front. And so there is virtual updating, renewing, changing of the website, and hence it will be recognized as an active website by Google. And it brings up its slot in Google searches or other forms of searches. And this makes possible what for the moment would be hardly possible for most of us. For example, I personally maintain a few websites, and I hardly have the time to do it. And hence, sometimes it would be stagnant for a long period. And based on this, its searchability would keep on going down because it's not moving at all. But if this is possible, then a group of people would be able to create a big network of websites in theosophy. And it will create a large network of interested students of theosophical subjects in a wide variety of fields. Now, what's the cost involved? This is, I think, something important. I looked at the prices right now if we get commercial hosting, and it's only $25 per year. Is that correct, Lloyd? About $2 per month. $2 per month. And if there are servers like you have here in TSA, then it is free because you already have the server and you can just keep on adding content. If there are 1,000 new sites, this will just be $25,000. 1,000 sites. I don't know how to maintain 1,000 sites. That's a lot already, but it only costs $25,000. Now, I was listening to the financial report the other morning, and this is just 1.3% of the budget of just the TS in America. It's something.
We're not making friends with our staff.
No, but what I'm saying is that it's possible even for small sections to do it. It's not, especially when it is, for example, 100 sites is $2,500. It's not that large, and it's affordable. And so it's something doable in terms of costings. It's probably less than 0.1% of global budget, and yet it can make a big difference in this work on the dissemination in the domain of ideas. Now, it seems necessary that we cover a wide field. The matrix of significant ideas must be spread out as widely as possible, which I'd like to talk about a bit later. For example, the dissemination ideas can focus on a few central key ideas, plus maybe, I don't know, 100 or 500 subsidiary ideas. In the Key to Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky referred to 4 key ideas in trying to bring about social transformation. And I'd like to mention those 4 key ideas. The first one, she says, is on universal unity or oneness. This the non-dual unity of the whole universe. The second is human solidarity, this universal brotherhood. The third one is karma, and the fourth one, she says, is reincarnation. Now, I have added 3 more ideas, which I thought would be important to serve as key ideas for wide-scale dissemination. One of them is human perfectibility. In other words, things that are allied, similar to Maslow's self-actualization, that human beings are capable of becoming mature until they're self-realized. Second would be spirituality and mysticism, which is the next step to psychological wholeness or maturity. And then essential unity of religions, recognizing that religion is one of the sources of division, of resentment, of conflict in the world in the past hundreds of years. So suppose these or other key ideas would be major themes in theosophical dissemination through websites. Then there are myriads of other topics. Then another one is applied theosophy, something which perhaps we can speak about a bit later. Applied theosophy, which would be how theosophical ideas can be used for various facets of human life, individual as well as social. And then we can address myriads of topics within the theosophical world under theosophy, things like meditation, ageless wisdom, perennial philosophy, death and the afterlife, parenting, education. Parenting and education would be part of applied theosophy, theosophical history, and so on. It can go into TOS subjects, to power of thoughts, what is God, Bible and esotericism, Yoga Sutras, and so on. And linking them, the thread that links them together would be theosophy. Now, some examples. When I do research in reincarnation, I find that there is not a single source wherein which I can get everything I need about reincarnation. For example, there is not enough, in fact, there is no single site that studies in much detail the researches of Dr. Ian Stevenson on reincarnation, but I think this is one of the most powerful evidences of reincarnation. And yet, you'll find single citation of cases, but not a comprehensive one. And Dr. Stevenson has written so many books of actual cases already. There can be as many as at least 10 websites which can be created, like reincarnation in Christianity, reincarnation in science, reincarnation in literature, for example. And I was discussing with Lloyd that after I go back, maybe I'd like to start a website just on reincarnation alone, and then linking it up with all the theosophical literature that we have on this. And this is one of the 4 key ideas that Blavatsky has been suggesting. Then it can be, then it's also life after death, according to theosophy. There are a lot of websites on near-death experiences on life after death, but not so much on the theosophical understanding of what happens during life after death. And then this can be linked to various parapsychological studies on apparitions, contact with the dead, death by accident, murder or suicide, and so on. Then it can be on things like secret doctrine. My roommate, Jacques, together with 2 other people, has started a website just on stanzas of Zen and Tibetan Buddhism. That's a very specialized area, and that's just one topic in the secret doctrine. It can be on so many other things. Then on human evolution, Atlantis, Lemuria, and so on. Then there is a very significant book written more than 100 years ago by Higgins. I forgot his first name. Anacalypsis. It's one of the books that is almost like Isis Unveiled and highly regarded by Madame Blavatsky. But there's hardly a study about it in the web, and that can be also another theme for a theosophical website. Applied theosophy can be very many things, and our familiarity with the applications of theosophy on the problems of living would be the limit of the extent of the subjects that can be created in the web along the area of applied theosophy. Stress management, effective relationships, psychological well-being, character building, meditation, education, parenting, vegetarianism, animal welfare, and the many concerns under the TOS and so on. So these are just examples of topics that can be the core of individual websites that can be linked to, that will form as a network of theosophical subjects. Then, and we are not even speaking about translations. Even if we just translate it to 10 languages, then you'll multiply everything by 10 times. At present, for example, there is only one exclusively theosophical website in Chinese. And yet Mandarin is spoken and read by 1.4 billion people, 1/5 of humanity. And so here, there's already a gaping hole, a vacuum of theosophical presence in the Chinese world, and there's so much possibility in this area. Then YouTube, webinar, online. I've been very impressed by what I see is happening here in TS USA in these areas, and I think you are so far advanced in these areas compared to the rest of us. And I was suggesting to some of the ones who are in charge of this, can you teach at least 10 sections, 10 of us, about what we can do in our own sections in order to do even just 1/3 of what you're able to do? It will make a big difference in how we disseminate theosophy in various ways through the internet at very inexpensive costs. So that's on the domain of ideas. And I think here, I just mentioned a few things, but I think many of you here are more aware of greater possibilities that I can even imagine, because you're far more familiar with that area of internet presence than I do. Let me now go into the domain of practice. As I said, ideas alone, unless it is reflected in daily life, in social life, then it would not be something that would have an impact in society. Here, I'd like to refer again to the Mahachohan, who wrote, "To be true, religion and philosophy must offer the solution of every problem." Now, this single statement, to me, is very significant. The Mahachohan is challenging us to apply theosophy to every single human problem that we face. And having known theosophy, I think all of us are aware that the keys to the major problems of the world and to human life can be found in the ageless wisdom. How do we now translate this into life practices? I think this is now the challenge that all of us are facing. And he says, to these, meaning the problems of the world, there must be somewhere a consistent solution. And if our doctrines will show their competence to offer it, if our doctrines will show their competence to offer it, we have to show it. In other words, we cannot assume it, we have to demonstrate it. If our doctrines will show their competence to offer it, then the world will be the first one to confess that that must be the true philosophy, the true religion, the true light, and which gives truth and nothing but the truth. This has been a recurring paragraph in my mind because 300 or 500 years from now, theosophy will show its worth depending upon how the ideas and the practices have changed the world. If not, then we will gradually fade into irrelevance. Let me just share with you about something which is known to many of you, especially educators, on how people learn. This is from NTL, National Training Laboratories, Institute of Applied Behavioral Science. It is estimated that when a person just listens to a lecture, he retains only 5% of what he hears. You'll only remember 5% of what I say today after we leave. When you read about what I've said, you'll retain double of that, which is just 10%. But when I show here something on the screen, then it doubles it further, 20% retention. And when something is demonstrated, like what Fernando did yesterday, then it goes up to 30%. Then when there's a discussion group where they are participating, where the participants are involved, then it goes up to half retention, 50%. And when it is done by practice, then the retention becomes 3/4 or 75%. And when we teach other people, retention goes very high to 90%. And here, the practice side is on the 75% level. Whatever ideas we are disseminating and we link it up to some form of practice, especially on a daily basis, then it becomes part of the lives of those who are studying these things. Otherwise, it becomes just an idea. In my experience, either in lecturing, in school, in conducting seminars and workshops, I've seen the general accuracy of this view, and that many adults find it difficult to go to the practice side, especially if it conflicts with their own conditioning. And hence, the ideas that they have absorbed could not be converted into practice. And it results in a kind of division, a kind of fragmentation in them, in which they say that they believe in something, but in actual life, they are not able to practice it. And that's the reason why the earlier that these ideas are exposed to young people and demonstrated to them, the more effective it is in the extent of retention of such ideas. Now, in introducing practices, I think the simple dynamics would be, we must test the practice first in small scale. Like, for example, in Zen, a small group of people will try it and it works, and then grow to larger scales until it becomes something that can be widely taught and applied. Again, we have to, in trying to cover practices and demonstrate practices, we have to try to cover as widely as possible the matrix of human life. Human life is so complex that we must try to reach certain key things in relation to the problems that people face. Then we become relevant to society. For example, a lot of people are stressed and distressed. If we have something to offer in this area, then we are addressing a very basic problem of human beings. And in fact, that's one of the things I'd like to mention. Let's take some examples. If we have theosophical institutes or centers that would address some of these things, then we are starting to demonstrate on the practice side the ideas that theosophy is offering. Let me just touch on a few. few things. For example, psychological well-being. When I prepared this talk, I had in mind a kind of stress management center which we are thinking to start in the Philippines. And then when I heard Fernando speak about this, and I thought, what a strange coincidence that he's speaking about this precisely. And so after his talk, I approached him. I said, Fernando, are you retired? He said, yes, I'm retired. Then why don't you get out of your retirement and then establish a stress clinic, a stress prevention or stress relief clinic with the Theosophical Society? And I don't know what your answer was, but I think he said, I'll think about it. I was very impressed by the science behind what he presented the other day. In other words, it is not just subjective experience, claims by people who are practicing, but there is science behind it, such that when you do mindfulness, then there are changes in the brain which would result in certain behavioral, new behaviors, or even the lowering down, the increase of immunity in terms of health improvement. And that's something that the world needs all over the world. And what would be needed would just be a room, an address, and people who know how to do it. And if there's a need for medical consultancy, there are many doctors in the Theosophical Society who will take care of that facet if there's a need for medical intervention, consultation, or advice. But basically, when it comes to mindfulness, it is not really a medical issue, and it's something that can be taught by non-medical people, I mean, people who are not doctors. But still, there's sometimes a medical facet to it. So a center for that can be established by various theosophical groups around the world. And where else would be an ideal place to start except TS in America, isn't it? Because you have the people, you have the experience, and you have the place also. It can be started small, and if it really addresses a deep need of human beings, then we are now in the area of applied theosophy, or practice. And this is something in preparation to psychological wholesomeness, which is an absolute necessity for spirituality. Without psychological integration, then spirituality is virtually impossible. We will keep on meeting obstacles, obstacle after obstacle, whenever we are derailed by our baggages in our mind, in our emotions, in our conditionings. Then it can be linked to meditation centers or centers for teaching meditation. One of the areas that results from, for example, a workshop like the Self-Transformation Seminar is on marriage workshop and parenting seminars. This has been going on unofficially, for example, in the Philippines as a result of the Self-Transformation Seminar. A number of doctors have been referring their clients to the Theosophical Society when their problems are on these areas, on stress, on distress, on their phobias, on marriage problems, and on parent-children problems. We don't even have a center yet, and yet people are referring individuals to the Theosophical Society. And I realized that there is a need also for a large number of the population when it comes to these areas. Another example is on education. In education, it can be putting up schools or colleges. It can be having scholarship programs, but with character-building component. We have several scholarship programs in the Philippines, and every one of them must have a character-building component, because if it's only a financial program, I think anybody can do it. A lot of rich people are doing it by the thousands. And yet, this is not really what we'd like to effect in society, people who have degrees or diplomas, but rather well-rounded and mature people who will benefit humanity because of what they are. then teacher training, dormitories, publishing, and so on. Let me just touch on education because I happen to be a bit more familiar with it, and it has been a focus of our work for the past many years in the Philippines. Madame Blavatsky wrote this in Key to Theosophy when it came to applied or practical theosophy. She says, if we had money, we would found schools which would turn out something else than reading and writing candidates for starvation. Children should above all be taught self-reliance, love for all men, altruism, mutual charity, and more than anything else, to think and reason for themselves. We should aim at creating free men and women, free intellectually, morally, unprejudiced in all respects, and above all things, unselfish. And we believe that much, if not all of this, could be obtained by proper and truly theosophical education. You know that she hasn't even spoken about teaching theosophy here. She's speaking about human development, the development of an individual. And personally, I believe that in the next 100 or 200 years, this would be, and this should be, a central focus of our work, because I've spoken to many groups, adult groups, youth groups, children's groups, and I've noticed that the rate of absorption and adaptation to ideas, to new ideas, are fastest among young people and slowest among the adults. It's very understandable because of conditionings. Conditioning can thicken and harden very easily through the years, and when once it hardens, then it's very hard to erase or soften it again. But for young people, they still don't have these hard conditionings, and that's why education is an important avenue for our work on transformation. Theosophical education has much to offer to the world. One, and to me it's important, it is non-sectarian. Second, it is rooted in spirituality and psychological well-being. It is, most schools, at least in the Philippines, are established in order for people to be able to have a good job, especially in colleges. They'd like to be accountant, they'd like to have a very good accounting program for you to become a good accountant. You'd like to become a good programmer, they'll make a very good curriculum for programming. But how about being a well-rounded, mature, happy person? There's hardly an organized curriculum in almost all the colleges and universities on this. When I ask parents as well as teachers, what would be the top quality, the number one or number two qualities that they would like their children to have when they grow up, then among those qualities, happiness would be somewhere along the top. Happiness. Not high income, not being a programmer, and so on, but happiness. And yet, how many schools teach Happiness 101? And yet, the thing is, it is a science, or at least a semi-science. There is sufficient science behind in the various approaches to having better chances of being a happy person. Then theosophical education is rooted in the ageless wisdom, in addition to spirituality, and it is an answer to the neurosis of our current society, and can prepare, and this is an important impact on for the future, can prepare wholesome leaders for the future. In our own history in the Philippines, some of the most brilliant presidents and leaders have been the worst in the Philippines. They have set back the Philippines for decades, despite the fact that they were probably the leaders with the highest IQ in all of Philippine history. And one of the most loved presidents was a president who was not even prepared to be a president, She was the widow of the slain senator, Aquino. And because the Senator Aquino, when he went back to the Philippines, he was assassinated at the airport. Then there was a huge movement to draft the wife to become president. She, of course, did not want to because she wasn't prepared at all. She finished linguistics in college and did not get involved at all in politics. And yet she had to respond to the call of the country and became the president. And she's sometimes called the president who doesn't know, meaning she doesn't know much about technical things, political things, and so on. And yet people really listen to her. Whenever she says something, she has so high a credibility that she was able to somehow bring together Philippine society in a new direction. And her son, who was a senator, had no ambition at all to be president. But a few years ago, when Mrs. Aquino died, then there was this huge wave of sympathy about her example and her life, that there was another surge or call for her son to be president. And then he became president, and he's doing very, very well. He's not technically prepared, and yet because of his integrity, he has now led the Philippines to have one of the highest growth rates, economic growth rates in Asia today, about 7 or 8% a year. That's quite high. Yeah. So it's not so much technical preparation or even IQ that I think will make a difference in life, but rather our being wholesome individuals. And I think that is what theosophical education can do. I'd just like to share with you some facts and statistics, because it opens up the possibilities before us as a theosophical society in the field of education. And I'd like to take as an example what the Catholic Church is doing in the field of education. The Catholic Church, with all its orders, subsidiaries, parishes, runs about 200,000 plus schools all over the world. And they have something like 52 million students all over the world. That's larger than many countries in the world. And you can imagine if they enter from kindergarten in such a Catholic school and graduates from college in a Catholic school, which would be how many years? About 18 or more years, or 20 years. You have 20 years of molding human beings into what you'd like them to become. A tremendous opportunity, and these students will pay to be molded. Isn't it? Yeah. It has, I think, one of the greatest impact on individual and social change that we can think of, more than media, more than parenting, and other forms of influence. In Ireland, for example, 91% of primary schools are Catholic. 91%. That's up to grade 6. In Australia, and we have 2 educators who are with us here, with whom I've been speaking about curriculum development for the past few days. Among all the schools, 1/3 or 34% are private schools. The others are public schools. Now, of these private schools, 60% are Catholic schools, or 60% go to Catholic schools, although Catholics only constitute 25% of the population. So their influence is far larger than their own population in relation to the total number of people in Australia. I'd like to give us an example. One of the congregations, there are so many congregations in the Catholic Church that nobody knows how many there are. I read in the web that there are 2 things that God doesn't know. One of them is how many orders or congregations there are in the Catholic Church. So one of them is La Salle Brothers. This comes from Saint La Salle from France. And before he died, he started a movement for educating poor people. Today, there are 5,000 members of this La Salle Brotherhood, an order of the Catholic Church. They're called brothers. And they have 1,000 schools in 80 countries with 900,000 students. In 80 countries, 900,000 students. And we are not yet even speaking about others like Jesuits, like Dominicans, like Franciscans, and so on. In the Philippines, for example, the 4 top universities in the Philippines, 3 of them are Catholic. And the leaders of the country come from these schools. You can see how much it can influence the direction of any society through education. Most important key to global transformation lies in right education. Now today, there are probably about 7 or 8 theosophical schools around the world. I just learned yesterday that Orissa has, and I've never knew that there was. And probably there are other such schools in India, but which are not well known to us. But there are probably there are less than 10 theosophical schools in the world. Why not 100 schools, 100 years? Is that difficult? It's not impossible. It's doable. And I think during the time of Annie Besant, there were so many schools, but were one by one given up through the years because of perhaps lack of interest or focus on education. And why not 1,000 schools in 200 years? Now, imagine the impact on society when we do have such institutions. So there are many other areas which can be looked into. So I'll just run through some of them, and you can think and brainstorm on 100 other things. Things like having theosophical institutes that give seminars like self-transformation seminars, courses on theosophy, online courses, retreats, regular lectures, then various TOS programs aside from relief services, animal clinics, scholarships, and I don't know, 100 other programs under the TOS on applied theosophy. Then organizational culture building. We're doing this now in the Philippines. There are many corporations which are asking us, the Theosophical Society, to conduct workshops and seminars for them on cultural building. Usually they ask for team building so that corporate members can work together well. But in addition to team building, what we have been introducing is culture building. A culture, for example, of harmony, assertiveness rather than timidity and aggressiveness. In other words, if I have a problem with a fellow worker in a company, do I gossip about him, or do I quarrel with him, or do I talk with him assertively in a harmonious way that does not create more problems? When such a culture is created, then conflicts within a group, a company, an association becomes much, much less. And so this is something which is ongoing. When I go back to the Philippines, there are 2 such groups. One is a university and the other is an NGO, non-government organization, that is requesting for such a cultural building in their organization. It can be leadership workshops which have been conducted for government officials in various provinces in the Philippines. Then it can be something on health, like yoga, then vegetarian societies, restaurants, and there can be so many other things. And I just thought of a number of things, but it wouldn't fit anymore, so I stopped when it filled up the page. But again, probably our imagination would be the only limit, and much of it is doable. If we try 100 initiatives and half of them fail, we will still have 50 enduring practices. And one of the things I've learned in theosophical work is never to be afraid of failure. If it's something worthwhile, do it. Doesn't work, then do it again. Doesn't work, do it again. So long as the idea is right. If the idea is not right, that's where the slab the service of the slab, the floor. The idea must be right, and then just keep on doing it, because one of these days it will have to work. But if the idea is wrong, then better not, because it will have harmful effects. And another principle is to start small, because from small, when it works, then it's easier to grow. So these thoughts, when we do well enough in the domain of ideas, and then demonstrate these in the domain of practice, then we ourselves are starting important seeds in the areas of personal and social transformation. And the reason why we are called upon, we are challenged to do this, is because there is something in theosophy that many others, or most others, could not offer. Many religious initiatives are somehow colored with their religious self-interests, their dogmas, their agenda. And from the theosophical viewpoint, it is important that work for humanity should, as much as possible, be non-sectarian, non-religious in the sense of sectarianism. And this is the reason why I think we are called upon to do this in the Theosophical Society, because of the unique role, the unique quality of theosophical wisdom, and the approach that we do in trying to help change the world. Good morning to all of you.